If you are currently experiencing a behavioral issue of any kind, feel free to email me as I do offer virtual coaching. And if you would like, you can go to my Facebook page and you can see all the reviews that I've had from previous clients. You decide one day you want to get a dog. You go to the shelter, or maybe you look online. You see pictures of dogs, and maybe one really stands out to you and you feel a connection to this dog before you've even met it. Or maybe you visit one at the shelter and immediately you begin to create a bond with a random dog that you know nothing about. Something inside of you says, I have to have this dog. Then you take the dog home, you provide it with shelter, you provide it with food, you provide it a place to sleep, you provide it comfort, you give it all the toys in the world, you play with it, you love it. And then one day, seemingly out of nowhere, the dog bites you. My name is Kevin. I've been working with dogs for 16 years. I currently help dog owners resolve behavioral issues that have developed in their dogs. I make the distinction on my channel that dog training is exclusively skill-based, while behavioral issues are largely socially related. So the focus of this channel is canine social dynamics and the relationship dynamic between dog and human. When I engage in resolving behavioral issues in dogs, I do not use treats, I do not use toys, I don't use play. My focus is on what's happening on a social level between dog and dog owner. Or maybe you soon realize that when people come into the home, the dog becomes aggressive towards the guests. You try to take the dog for a walk and it's growling, lunging, snapping, snarling, and everything within a 100-foot radius. Maybe you have a newborn, you bring that baby home, and very quickly you find out that this dog has another side to itself, and it begins to attack your child. What is at the root of all of this aggressive behavior? In my 16 years of working with dogs, I have found that there seems to be a rise in the number of aggressive dogs that I encounter, and it is the number one thing that people call me for help with. And if you look online, maybe in Facebook groups, browsing TikTok, or viral YouTube videos show up in your feed, you start to understand that this is a very common problem. I have personally noticed an increase in the number of aggressive and reactive dogs that are out in the world today, but I've also noticed that there is a rise in aggressive behavior in children. There's a lot of overlap when it comes to the rise in aggressive behavior between dogs and children because the parenting style required for building the correct relationship dynamic is virtually the same whether you have a child or a dog. I can't tell you how many clients' homes I've been to where once we're done addressing issues in their dog and they see the progress already being made within a couple of hours, they'll joke around and ask me, hey, does this work on kids or teenagers too? And the short answer is yes. You see, the parent-child dynamic is extremely similar to the relationship dynamic that you should seek to cultivate with your dog. Dogs are social creatures, as are we. The human-dog relationship is very similar to a parent-child relationship. In part 2 of this series, we will explore the 4 different parenting styles and how one of them in particular is the most successful when it comes to how you should approach relationship building with your dog. What's interesting is that this one parenting style that is the most successful with humans and dogs is also the most successful with parents and children. You may have noticed that in the last few decades, there is a huge cultural shift towards things like force-free and positive reinforcement-based training. Some of these advocates even going so far as to say that you should never even tell your dog no. Are we seeing the same mentality being applied towards parents in how they approach disciplining their children? In answering these questions, some solutions become fairly self-evident. However, moving forward in resolving other issues is not so clear. And when you interject something like social media, that misinterpretation and misapplication of the solution can often snowball into greater cultural misunderstanding, which can further compound the problem, as you will see over the course of this series. So I was recently in this Facebook group called Aggressive Dogs Training and Advice, who I've since been kicked from because me and the moderators did not see eye to eye on things. But before I was kicked out, there was a woman who posed this interesting question about aggressive dogs. And she had noticed, or she said, it seems like there are so many more of them these days. And she was asking if anybody else had noticed this and why do they believe this is the case. And so, of course, I gave my 2 cents, but I decided this would be an interesting opportunity to connect some dots, because I ran across a news story which discussed aggressive behavior in kids and how it's on the rise nationwide.
Psychotherapist Dr. Nanette Funderburk says she's hearing about the aggressive behavior and lack of respect across all age groups. It's not just happening here, though, but across the nation. The two big questions: why is this happening, and what can we do to combat it?
And considering the parent-child dynamic is very analogous to the human-dog relationship, it raises some questions about what it is that's pushed in the mainstream and by the, quote, experts as far as what is recommended in terms of how should we engage with children and how we should engage with our dogs.
Treats are a huge part of training a dog, and you guys are always asking me, Zach, what kind of treats do you use when you train? And to be honest with you, it really depends. Like people, dogs aren't always in the mood for the same thing, so it's really important that your dog find whatever treat you're using very reinforcing to them, and you want something that's really going to capture their attention. Pupford has really curated the best of the best treats out there. For example, these freeze-dried chicken treats are new, and Inertia will do almost anything for these.
So if we look at the position statement from the AVSAB organization, which is the American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior, their position on dog training essentially states that the scientific evidence purports that the use of reward-based methods should be used for all canine training. And it essentially offers up this idea that training your dog is a learning endeavor, which it's not. And it goes on to purport that using any kind of aversive method, or it always jumps to punishment, which I'm not a proponent of, say, quote, punishment, that these things promote long-term negative effects on your dog. Well, what's interesting, though, is if you read through this, an emphasis is put on the emotional well-being of the dog as far as stress levels, anxiety, and it even talks about how more serious behaviors such as aggression, anxiety, and fear require a treatment plan that includes environmental management, which basically means avoidance, behavior modification, which I don't know how you would do that using only one methodology, and in some cases medication. Of course, basically we don't know how to solve the root of the issue, therefore we will put a band-aid over it. And it later describes what is this based on, and it's not even based on actual studies. If you look, its survey studies have shown an association between the use of aversive training methods and long-term behavior problems, including aggressive behavior towards people and other dogs, and anxiety-related behaviors such as avoidance and excitability. Of course, it does say right here, survey studies cannot differentiate between causation and correlation. All right, and the only two examples it gives, it has to do with, say, aversive methods. And so it never actually addresses what could be causing something like aggression. They never answer that question. And of course, what's most fascinating is if you look further down, there's a section titled "How Should a Veterinarian Decide Who to Refer to for Training?" It goes on to talk about how if a trainer is observed using aversive training methods, or if a trainer discusses outdated ideas such as, quote, dominance or leader of the pack or alpha theories, then clients should be advised against hiring them. This is interesting considering the actual body of scientific data does not agree with this. And I have another video which goes in depth about David Mack, which is the individual they use to claim that these things are discredited. He's cleared this up numerous times, and you can even read his books and find the data for yourself about how these are not outdated ideas, and these are in fact scientifically backed assertions. And so the fact that an organization like AVSAB would not acknowledge the role of dominance is pretty hilarious. And of course, it's no different if you were to go to, say, the American College of Veterinary Behaviorists. Their position statement is no different. They even have a whole section about dominance, and they talk about how dominance has been discredited, and a dog's aggression towards a person is unlikely to be motivated by an attempt to establish dominance. Other causes such as fear and conflict are more likely. Yeah, these people do not understand, nor will they consider dominance to be a common cause of dog aggression directed towards people. Applying this misinterpretation of dominance to the diagnosis and management of human-directed aggression is counterproductive. They basically just will say it doesn't exist, don't acknowledge it, it's bullshit. So how does this directly tie to the rise in aggression with children? Well, what's pushed by the child psychologists is this notion of gentle parenting, and I'm sure you've heard of it. But gentle parenting is basically no different than, say, in the dog world, the positive reinforcement only training. I found numerous articles on this, but a few of note would would be this one from The Independent, which was titled "Gentle Parenting is No Way to Bring Up Children, and I Should Know." And the tagline was "The mild-mannered parenting style popularized by millennials, which means never saying no." I'm sure you've heard that before when talking about, quote, dog training. Or raising your voice is facing backlash from exhausted and confused mothers, worried they're producing a generation of indulged and self-obsessed brats. Now, you should check out my other video where I had discussed a client who they hired a positive-only individual to try to address the dog who was engaging in a lot of demanding behavior, and it was becoming quite aggressive in nature, and how he made their dog worse.
She's been barking at me for about an hour now.
Then we have this article by NBC News, which was actually October of 2024, why gentle parenting is proving too rough for many parents. And it purports the idea that maybe some experts say maybe it's time to stop. Yeah, because it doesn't work, and it produces a child who is empowered, doesn't respect you, and you'll produce a dog of the same mindset. But the article that I found really, really interesting was this one from the New Yorker titled "The Harsh Realm of Gentle Parenting." And I love the photograph. This is a perfect illustration, because if you notice the roles the parents are taking, right? They're taking a very passive role while the child just does whatever the fuck it wants. This is no different than the positive reinforcement crowd and their approach to dogs, where they basically just let the dog do whatever it wants. They take a passive role, and we only just reward the dog when it's doing what we want, and we totally ignore the things that we don't want the dog to do, which gets you nowhere. But what's interesting to note about this article is this woman is essentially questioning the gentle parenting narrative, and she read a book called Brain Body Parenting by a child psychologist named Mona Delahooke, and talks about how this individual, she says she made a confession in the book, and she was talking about how when she was under a great deal of stress, she would say things she later regretted to her children due to stress and exhaustion. She said it, quote, turned her into an authoritarian and controlling mom. Now, you'll often hear this narrative in the dog world, where people will excuse a dog's behavior and say, well, it's due to stress or anxiety, so on and so forth. No, it's never due to hierarchy or the social nature of a dog or the role maybe of dominance. No, it's all of an emotional nature. Which, if you read this article, she goes on to talk about how gentle parenting centers on basically validating a child's feelings and the motivations behind challenging behavior, as opposed to addressing the behavior itself. Now, I don't necessarily disagree with this when it applies to dogs, because we have to understand the cause of the behavior and the mindset that the dog is in, which leads to the behavior. But the reality is still the same. We still have to address the behavior itself. Now, this claims that the gentle parent holds firm boundaries, but you give your child choices instead of orders, and eschews rewards, punishments, and threats. You know, no sticker charts, no timeouts, no I will turn this car around right now instead of issuing commands. Put on your shoes. But essentially this revolves around understanding, why does the child not want to put his shoes on, or why does the child not want to do this? It only serves to, like it says here, learns to recognize and control their emotions, because a caregiver is I love the word caregiver instead of parent, right? Consistently affirming those emotions as real and important. The parent provides a model for keeping one's cool, but no overt incentives for doing so. The kid becomes a person who is self-regulating, kind, and conscientious because she wants to be, not because it will result in ice cream. Now let's apply this to the dog world. I agree, yeah, the dog should behave, do what's expected, not because it will get a reward, but because it respects you and it perceives you the right way. So it also goes on to say, gentle parenting represents a turn away from a still dominant progressive approach known as, quote, authoritative parenting. Now, I often tell my clients that the correct role you should be playing isn't one of an authoritative role. You know, you're an authority figure to your dog. Your dog does not have the rational capabilities or the cognitive abilities to understand completely the human world. And so it is our job to lead the dog correctly and be an authority so we can better protect our dog and we can build a more fruitful bond with the dog. There's a part in here where it talks about parents in, say, boards and group texts, how people are noticing that as it says, a fatigue is setting in, and it's about deferring to a child's every mood and every emotional whim, the strict maintenance of an emotional effect, the notion that trying to keep a schedule could be, quote, authoritarian. Sometimes the people are saying a tantrum isn't worthy of being placed on a pedestal, and I would agree. Tantrum does not get you what you want, and this applies directly to dogs. Dogs will throw tantrums if they don't get what they want, especially puppies. Sometimes they plead, their voices rising past a gentle threshold. You just need to put your freaking shoes on. And I agree. Sometimes it's just, we need to do this because we need to do this. But this article gets more interesting. So as she says, one of the major themes in this book is that children don't defend simplify for the sake of defiance, but that their challenging behavior is a psychological response to stress and should be seen as essentially adapted. This is no different than these behavioral organizations for dogs claiming that dominance is not real. Your dog is not behaving or aggressive because of dominant tendencies. No, it is a physiological response to stress. But as the person who wrote this article rightly questions, she says this is one of the most confounding dilemmas of parenting, especially as kids exit the toddler stage. And this is like as dogs enter the adolescent stage. They enter the young stage and become an adolescent. Sometimes a child tests or destroys boundaries for the thrill of it. Sometimes dogs will test you if they see you as weak. Sometimes dogs will push boundaries because they know they can. Sometimes it's of a dominant nature. Sometimes it's a battle for control. The dog wants that control, but of course we don't want to acknowledge this. Dogs are social creatures, just like us, just like children. So we have to acknowledge that the social nature of these things is the most important part of it. But this psychologist says under the gentle parenting schema, a child's every act must be seen through a lens of anxiety and threat detection. And this is where people like Robert Hines will tell you that every negative behavior is the result of cortisol or anxiety or an emotional state within the dog. Now, in terms of an aggressive behavior, this individual discusses a mother whose 5-year-old kept hitting and pinching his younger sister, right? Aggressive behavior. And the psychologist would tell you he doesn't feel safe to open up and share himself. He feels attacked. He feels judged. He feels misunderstood. He feels he has to defend himself rather than having his mother or father or both of them being really curious about what is going on. And this was from a 2012 post by an individual with the name of Lansbury who is trying to describe the perspective of a toddler with aggression issues. And I believe this is of a hypothetical nature, but it even goes on to say if I keep repeating the behavior, it's because it doesn't feel resolved. Now, it goes on to rightly point out that when this individual Lansbury counsels the mother of a child who hits, there's no acknowledgement of the sister that's being hit, even though she may also feel, quote, attacked. There's no expectation of her mother, quote, being really curious about what's going on inside the girl after she's been hit by the little boy. No recognition that the girl may wonder why her brother hitting her should not be judged. No thought given to the social consequence of being known as a hitter, or if those how those consequences might adversely shape a child's self-perception. So then we can make the parallel in the dog world with the notion that the dog is aggressive because of some emotional reason, and we should just try to understand that emotional reason and cater to that emotional reason or emotional cause rather than actually socially understanding what's happening and providing a consequence to that action so we can help to balance the dog out in the same way that you would provide a consequence to the child so that it understands that this is unacceptable and that there are consequences for your actions. This is why individuals in the Force Free or Positive Reinforcement Only community cannot and will never show you a video of them working with a dog who has aggression issues, because in their world you can't issue the type of consequence that falls within their worldview. They will automatically have an emotional gut response to it as being bad or abusive or so on and so forth, even though these things are actually quite innate and instinctual to a dog's nature. Puppies do this to each other. Adult dogs will check and correct each other. When the dominance hierarchy is formed, the most dominant dogs will address the behaviors that they do not want, and they will put the other dogs in their place. That is the consequence that needs to be administered. It's the discipline that needs to be administered so that order can be maintained within the hierarchy. And I think we as social creatures also instinctually understand this, but we have a hard time translating it to our dogs because we tend to humanize them too much. But what this really comes down to is that there's two ways to empower a child and there's two ways to empower a dog. You can spoil the shit out of them and reward them at all the wrong times, and especially when they didn't earn it. And you can let disrespectful, entitled behavior go unchecked until the dog or child becomes empowered and it reaches a point where there's truly no respect at all, and that child or dog has all the control it needs to reach the level where it will hit you or it will bite you. And at the end of the day, all Mother Nature cares about is strength and weakness.
Right?
He's a Dogo Argentine.
Oh, okay.
So he's an Argentinian Mastiff.
Okay. You're gorgeous. You're gorgeous. Oh, I'm so glad you're okay. You too. You too. Thank goodness for you.
Yeah.
Gosh, have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Happy Valentine's Day. Oh my God. Gary.